The late afternoon atmosphere in JFK's international terminal thickened with the hurried rhythm of hundreds of footsteps, the rolling of suitcases blending with the steady announcements from the speakers. Madeline Joyner gently pulled her ash-gray cabin suitcase, walking with the quiet confidence of someone well accustomed to luxury spaces, but never one to flaunt herself. At 46, she carried an inexplicable allure, not the instant glamour of flashiness, but the maturity of experience, power, and resilience honed through years of confronting prejudice. Her first-class ticket for the direct flight to London, seat 2A, was securely in hand, booked and fully paid 3 weeks prior. In theory, everything was arranged to ensure a smooth journey. Yet Madeline's experience had taught her that sometimes the most uncomfortable setbacks occur precisely where professionalism is expected most. When the first boarding group was called, Madeline calmly stepped to the gate and scanned her ticket. The beep sounded, the green light flashed, but before she could move into the jet bridge, a female voice rang out. Soft, yet tinged with an unnatural sweetness that hardly seemed neutral. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong line." Madeline turned slightly, meeting the pursed smile of Olivia Trent, a gate agent in her early 30s, her name tag gleaming on her collar. Olivia's gaze swept over Madeline from head to toe, pausing briefly as if comparing the woman before her with a mental image. Then she tilted her head toward the electronic sign above, her voice rising slightly. "This area is for executive first, class passengers only." The emphasis on executive immediately conveyed the underlying implication. Madeline maintained her polite smile, replying succinctly, "I know. My seat is 2A." The green light on the scanner remained lit, clear proof of the ticket's validity. Yet Olivia slowly extended her hand, signaling to recheck. Madeline handed over the ticket, but Olivia did not take it, merely glancing long enough to read the name and seat number before, hesitating as if weighing something beyond her duties. In that brief moment, Madeline saw not just personal suspicion, but an old, familiar pattern, one of judging people by criteria unrelated to their true value or abilities. The line behind began to grow. Some passengers glanced anxiously at their watches. Others watched the scene as if it were free theater. Madeline, guided by instincts refined over decades in business, knew that silence could sometimes be stronger than any defense. She stood firm, letting the space between herself and Olivia grow heavy, allowing the surrounding gazes to fall upon her without shaking her stance. It was a silence not of resignation, but of calculated choice, a waiting she knew would eventually force her opponent to reveal more clues. Olivia glanced briefly at her tablet screen, then returned with a stiff smile. "I don't see your name on the active first-class passenger list. Maybe you were upgraded automatically without realizing it." The question, masked by a friendly tone, carried denial. Madeline merely raised an eyebrow. "I purchased this seat 3 weeks ago." At that moment, whispers began to spread behind her, and Madeline knew the stage was set. Only difference was she would never let others direct her story. A slight movement in the corner of her eye told Madeline that Olivia had just signaled someone. From the service counter, Ethan Cole, the middle-aged gate manager, approached. He wore a navy suit with a neatly tied tie, his gait exuding familiarity with authority. Ethan's eyes quickly scanned from the ticket to Madeline's face, then lowered his voice as if to reassure, though the tone carried an unspoken acknowledgement that she was causing trouble for the process. "Perhaps the system upgraded you by mistake, ma'am. We can arrange a seat for you in the lower cabin, which is still very comfortable." The words were wrapped in polite language, but Madeline clearly sensed it was a tactful command. Behind them, a few people raised their eyebrows, some phones were lifted, red camera lights peeking out from behind hands. The same looks lingered, curiosity mixed with judgment, as if waiting to see how this woman of color would react when invited to leave first class. Madeline did not reply immediately. She inhaled slowly, letting each heartbeat blend with the noisy backdrop of the terminal, then calmly spoke her answer, not raising her voice, but loud enough for Ethan to hear. "I will not leave my seat. If you believe there is a mistake, please verify the transaction. I have fully paid for seat 2A. Ethan slightly raised his eyebrows, as if unaccustomed to having his suggestion so bluntly refused. He exchanged a glance with Olivia, then turned back to Madeline, his tone firmer this time. "I just want to resolve this quickly, so as not to delay everyone's flight." His words were both a reminder and an indirect pressure from the crowd. Madeline remained standing, hands relaxed, gaze steady. "Then resolve it in the right way," she replied, "with data, not assumptions." At that moment, the whispers grew louder. A man behind murmured to his companion, "Maybe she's trying to sneak into first class." A woman wearing headphones shook her head, pursing her lips. "She doesn't look like an executive passenger." Madeline heard every word but revealed no emotion. She knew that every action, every word now, would shape the entire story. And she had decided this would be her own story, not one scripted to satisfy prejudice. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then suddenly stepped back as if to create space to handle the situation in his own way. He turned to Olivia. "Call the supervision team to recheck the manifest." His voice carried a sense of urgency, but he maintained composure under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Olivia immediately bent over her tablet, fingers swiftly scrolling across the touchscreen. But just seconds later, she looked up and uttered the familiar phrase, "I don't see your name on the active first class list. It might be an automatic upgrade or—" She hesitated. "A booking error." Madeline remained unmoved. In the white light of the terminal, her features grew even calmer, resisting not with words or gestures, but with deliberate silence. She knew this silence was gradually testing the patience of those facing her, and when patience runs thin, secrets once kept tend to reveal themselves naturally. A young passenger in the line behind, wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack, quietly lifted his phone to record. The red recording light flickered, reflecting in his focused eyes. A middle-aged woman nearby whispered to her companion, "She scanned her ticket already. Why is she being held back?" Yet no one stepped forward to intervene. Those gazes were a mix of judgment and anticipation, waiting to see how the story would unfold, and whether it was worth their involvement. Madeline tilted her head slightly, as if weighing her next move. Without changing expression, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and swiped to open her contacts. The name Dominic Harris appeared, glowing bright against the dark screen. She pressed call. When the line was answered, her voice lowered, firm but resolute. "Activate internal oversight procedure, level 1, immediately at gate C11. Without further explanation, she hung up, slipped the phone back into her bag, and returned to her spot, as if no call had just taken place. Those nearby may not have understood the content, but they sensed something had shifted, not in Madeline's demeanor, but in the very breath of the entire scene. Less than 2 minutes later, the electronic screen above the boarding gate suddenly flickered and then displayed a new message. Operational review in progress. Stand by. The crowd moving toward the check encounter abruptly paused. Murmurs rose along with impatient sighs. Olivia blinked, momentarily flustered, then glanced at Ethan as if awaiting instructions. Ethan frowned, tapping his fingers lightly on the counter's edge, trying to maintain control, but his eyes betrayed his unease. Madeline stood still, unmoving and silent. She observed every reaction, from the scrutinizing eyes, to Olivia biting her lip, to Ethan leaning toward the screen, hoping for a reasonable explanation. She knew her silence was no longer defensive, but an invisible pressure. A security officer in a dark blue uniform approached from a distance. Her name tag read, Grace Navarro. Late 30s, sturdy build, sharp eyes of someone accustomed to handling situations. Grace walked slowly, scanning the scene before stopping at Madeline. "Is there a problem here?" she asked in a calm, clear voice. Olivia opened her mouth to reply, but Ethan cut in. "We are re-verifying a case, possibly a mismatch with the booked seat class." Grace did not respond immediately, instead studying Madeline for a few more seconds. By professional intuition, she recognized that this woman's calm was not empty confidence. When Madeline slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a silver card embossed with the Airport Management Corporation's logo, Grace immediately understood whom she was facing. The card bore the words, Stakeholder, Tier 1, Access. Without further explanation, Grace nodded slightly and turned to Ethan and Olivia. "Halt all procedures at this gate. Related personnel must leave their posts immediately." Her voice was low but sufficient to hush the surrounding sounds. Madeline gently tilted her head, a silent affirmation. She needed no loud words, for everything necessary had been expressed through actions, and true power, she knew, always lay there. News of the disruption at Gate C11 quickly spread throughout the boarding area. A few curious passengers stepped to the adjacent aisle for a better view, while several phones began live streaming on social media. Amid the wave of curiosity, a young man wearing a bomber jacket and headphones, later identified as Leo, quickly searched for information. In less than a minute, he found a business article featuring an image of Madeline standing at a podium during an international conference. The headline read, "Madeline Joyner, CEO and major shareholder of Meridian Aviation Infrastructure Group." Leo stared intently at his phone screen, then looked up, covertly glancing from the article's photo to the woman calmly standing just a few meters away. He softly whistled and whispered to his girlfriend beside him, "She is the boss here." That whisper ignited a spark in the dry grass, swiftly spreading through the waiting seats. Curious glances turned into stunned eyes. Several people immediately lowered their phones, as if realizing they were capturing a moment too significant to be mere gossip. Meanwhile, Ethan and Olivia began exchanging hushed words, their faces tense. Clearly they were not entirely convinced, but also dared not be sure of anything. Grace stood at the edge of the area, observing closely, ready to handle any move that crossed the line. The atmosphere around the gate slowed down. Every movement became cautious, awaiting a signal from the only person who seemed unaffected by the chaos, Madeline. She quietly glanced at the electronic information board. A new message had just appeared on the screen. All boarding paused. Stakeholder have full oversight in effect. No flight number, no departure time. Just a cold, decisive command. Murmurs rose again, but this time accompanied by eyes beginning to harbor respect, though no one yet spoke it aloud. Madeline remained still, shoulders straight, gaze fixed ahead. She knew that sometimes, to assert power, you don't need to step forward or raise your voice. Just stand in the right place and let everything move around you naturally. Ethan stepped back a pace, pulling his phone from the vest pocket. His voice lowered as he spoke into the device, yet Madeline could detect the tension seeping through every syllable. Olivia, standing right beside him with her arms crossed, kept glancing between the electronic board and Madeline as if searching for a loophole to turn the situation around. But that moment had passed. From the other side of the boarding area, 2 airport operations staff in grey uniforms appeared, holding tablets and wearing badges labeled Operational Audit Team. They approached Grace, exchanged brief words, then turned to Ethan. One of them spoke in a steady, firm tone. Gate C11 is now under Level 1 control protocol. All direct operating personnel must temporarily vacate their posts to facilitate the review. Ethan hesitated briefly, but Grace's cold, piercing gaze made it clear this was no time for negotiation. Olivia pressed her lips together and bent down to gather a stack of documents from the counter. As she stepped away, a few nearby passengers leaned toward each other, whispering. No one laughed or showed satisfaction, only silence mixed with a hint of discomfort, like witnessing a sudden shift in the balance of power firmly to one side. Madeline said nothing. She waited until all movement ceased, leaving only the faint announcements echoing from another gate. Then from her side bag, she pulled out a black folder and gently placed it on the empty counter. The cover flipped open, revealing neatly clipped documents, each page stamped and bearing prominent signatures. The atmosphere around the gate seemed to freeze. She lifted her head, eyes scanning every face still standing there. Staff, passengers, security. Before speaking in a deep, resonant, and clear voice. From this moment forward, all activities here will be under my direct supervision. Madeline's declaration seemed to silence the entire area, not because of its volume, but due to the way each word was spoken. Clear, deliberate, leaving no room for doubt. Grace stood slightly angled toward her, hands relaxed but eyes vigilant, affirming that everything Madeline said would be enforced immediately. One of the 2 audit staff stepped forward, quickly flipping to the first page of the folder. A red circular stamp and the words, Tier 1 Oversight, Meridian Airport's Infrastructure, stood out prominently at the top. He nodded quietly without a word, then signaled to his colleague to begin cordoning off the area. Within less than a minute, yellow safety tape was stretched across the gate entrance, blocking all access. Ethan, now left standing outside the tape, struggled to maintain calm, though the veins at his temples twitched repeatedly. Olivia stood nearby, clutching her folder tightly, her fingernails tapping lightly on the plastic cover, a subtle but unmistakable sign of impatience. Neither of them spoke out in protest anymore, not because they had come to understand, but because they knew any reaction now would only make things worse. Madeline calmly closed the folder and placed it neatly aside. She did not seek anyone's eye contact, yet everyone felt as though they had just been thoroughly scrutinized. In that moment, silence became a tangible form of power, not requiring commands or arguments, yet compelling all to stand still and await further instructions. Then, in a steady voice, she turned to Grace. "Inform the entire operations team. Every decision at this gate, from now on, must be confirmed directly through me." Grace nodded, pulled the radio from her belt, and stepped aside to relay the order. The familiar crackling sound filled the air, punctuated by brief responses from other units. "Copy." Soon after, a senior coordinator appeared, slim, wearing a grey suit and a burgundy tie. He approached cautiously, nodding slightly to Madeline. "Ms. Joyner, I've been assigned to assist with the oversight process. Please provide specific instructions." Madeline did not answer immediately. She glanced at her watch, then slowly opened the folder and pulled out a document bearing dual stamps, one from the Airport Management Corporation, the other from the Federal Oversight Agency. Holding it out to the coordinator, she said succinctly, "Implement emergency review procedures. All personnel involved in the initial interaction with me are to be suspended pending investigation. No exceptions." The coordinator paused briefly, then nodded softly. "I will proceed immediately." He turned to Ethan and Olivia, pointing toward a separate waiting area. No objections, no excuses, only heavy footsteps moving away from the counter. The atmosphere around Gate C11 grew even more charged. Some passengers began whispering that they had never witnessed anything like this before. Leo, the young man still holding his phone, quietly recorded a short clip focusing on the moment Olivia crossed the yellow tape. He knew that in just a few minutes, these images would be everywhere across social media platforms. Madeline maintained her upright stance, hands resting lightly on the empty counter, her gaze calm. She had nothing more to say, for the entire stage was set for the next act, and she was the only one holding the script. As Ethan and Olivia left the area, all attention seemed to focus almost entirely on Madeline. The yellow tape, the electronic board displaying stakeholder oversight in effect, and the presence of the audit team had transformed Gate C11 into a silent stage where every gaze awaited the next move. Madeline signaled to Grace and the coordinator to follow her into the small space behind the counter. The door closed, leaving only murmurs and announcements echoing from other gates. Inside, she placed the folder on the table, slowly flipping through each page. Every document was a piece of the authority she wielded, from contracts with the Airport Management Corporation to federal oversight regulations. "I don't want this to be just a disciplinary action. This will be a message," she said in a low but firm voice. The coordinator nodded, quickly typing into his tablet. Grace stood with arms crossed, eyes steady, ready to carry out any request. When the door reopened, Madeline stepped out with a different demeanor, not a passenger being blocked, but the one controlling the entire situation. She moved straight to the center, where passengers could hear clearly. "Thank you all for your patience," she began, her voice loud enough to overpower the surrounding noise. "What is happening is not a disruption but a correction process. When a system operates on assumptions and prejudices instead of truth and standards, it needs to be reset." A wave of silence spread. Many lowered their phones, focusing on each word. Madeline continued, "I am a shareholder and CEO of the Aviation Infrastructure Group, responsible for operating this place. From the moment I was asked to leave my purchased first-class seat, just because I didn't look like an executive passenger, I knew what had to be done. At this point, some in the crowd nodded, others whispered among themselves, but no one left. Madeline concluded with a brief order to Grace. Restart boarding under audit team supervision. Ensure that from now on, every passenger is evaluated by their ticket information, not by anyone's glance. As passengers began to line up again, the atmosphere had shifted completely. No more suspicious whispers, only quiet respect. Some offered Madeline a slight smile as they passed. Leo, still filming, lowered his phone and whispered to his companion. She didn't just reclaim her seat. She changed the whole game. Madeline boarded last, unhurried. Entering first class, she neatly stored her bag in the overhead compartment and sat down in seat 2A, her rightful place. The lead flight attendant, a young woman with knowing eyes, bowed slightly. "We apologize for the incident, and thank you." Madeline simply smiled and replied briefly, "Let your service on this flight be the apology." Throughout the flight, she did not revisit the story. But when the plane landed, news and short videos had spread across social media. The headline stood out: CEO denied first class seat, and how she changed the entire system on the spot. Images of the yellow tape, the announcement board, and Madeline's calm stance became symbols of a simple yet profound lesson. True power needs no noise. It only needs to appear at the right time, in the right place, and never yield to wrongdoing. Stepping out of the airport in London, Madeline noticed her phone buzzing non-stop. Messages from the press, invitations to conferences, and thanks from passengers she had never met. She turned off the screen, put her phone away, leaving behind a fleeting but clear thought. I didn't come here to fly. I came to land power exactly where it was needed most. From the perspective of someone well-versed in management and organizational culture, Madeline Joyner's story reveals an undeniable truth. True power does not lie in the volume of one's voice, but in the ability to calmly, precisely, and transparently store order. A system can only maintain fairness when those in authority stand up, not to assert ego, but to reset the standards for all. Madeline's actions not only reclaimed justice for herself, but also sent a powerful message. Prejudice and assumptions must never replace data and procedure. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, please hit like and subscribe to join us on journeys exploring the power of presence and timely voice. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "right time," to affirm together that timing and courage always make the difference.